Let's talk about gender-neutral pronouns, as we are writing with pronouns in the 21st century. So as you know, our language is constantly evolving. The language we use today is not the language we used centuries ago, or sometimes just decades ago. Who says thee and thou anymore, beyond Shakespeare or the King James Bible? Our language changes, and so maybe we should change as well. So as we move further into the 21st century, linguists are beginning to reconsider the archaic gender-specific pronouns we still use in regards to a culture that may not see gender as binary, meaning only male and female. It's true. Pronouns are one of those few things we have left over which are still very specific in gender. And as we move forward in our century, I might find that finding something very binary is kind of old-fashioned. So here's the new agenda that's out there. Should we make they singular? Yes, I don't know. Is they out of their minds? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it's time for a change. So because the third person plural includes both male and female, a problem arises when we look for a pronoun to refer to an unidentified person, such as a phrase like the writer or someone or a person. How do I refer to that? Do I specify them being male or female, or do I look for something new? So let's take a look at an example sentence. If I said every writer should be aware of the power of language when they choose their pronouns. Well, this is grammatically incorrect. They is a nice alternative because it has no gender. And I think that's why we want to use the word they as being singular, because every writer is singular because of the word every. But they and their aren't really singular. So every makes the subject singular, but they is plural, and that doesn't really work. So if writer is singular, we have to use a singular pronoun. Which could we use? Let's talk about some of the options that are out there. So the first possibility is simply to use the masculine pronoun. So every writer should be aware of the power of language when when he chooses his pronouns. So this is a very traditional choice. Masculine pronouns historically were always looked at as being both masculine as well as neuter. What that means is when you use the word he, you could be referring to like the male gender, or you could be just simply referring to people in general, meaning that it was just simply neuter. So that's why words like mankind or be kind to your fellow man are not sexist. It's just a word that we use, even though it has the word man in there. It was just simply a very neuter or very safe word, or at least they didn't mean to be sexist. But it's the 21st century, and maybe it's time for us to get rid of words like mankind or your fellow man. Possibility number 2, you can also use the female pronoun. Every writer should be aware of the power of language when she chooses her pronouns. I love this choice. I like it for a number of reasons. Using the feminine pronoun is acceptable. It is a double standard, though. So if a male uses the masculine pronoun, like he, you're just looked at as being very traditional. If a male uses the feminine pronoun, you're kind of looked at as being very forward-thinking, maybe very sensitive, very liberal. I think it's cool when a male writer uses a female pronoun like this. But unfortunately, there's a double standard. Ladies, when you use the masculine pronoun like he, you're also seen as being traditional. That's fine. Here's the sad part, though. When a female oftentimes uses a feminine pronoun, sometimes people can look at it as being very feminist. And I don't think that's very fair at all. But unfortunately, people have their opinions and we can't really change them. So just be careful sometimes of using the feminine pronoun the way that you might be viewed. I know it is crazy. It's just how it is, Raven. Third possibility, you can also use both he and she. You could say, every writer should be aware of the power of language when he/she chooses his/her pronouns. So you notice here that the male is first and how the subsequent pronouns that also follow it then puts the masculine one first. So he, she, so therefore it's his, her. And that's a possibility. All right. Some people don't like the fact that he comes first. So could we reverse it? You could. There's other variations. You can also do the every writer should be aware of the power of language when S/he chooses her/his pronouns. The S/he is a way of letting us know that it's she, he, And then we have the her, his, putting the female first. And so in this case, females come first. Maybe that's a better choice for you. And lastly is number 5. So every writer should be aware of the power of language when he or she chooses his or her pronouns. You'll see this as an answer on the SAT, and it is a guaranteed correct answer. Anytime they give you he or she, more than likely they've set it up so that they want you to choose he or she as opposed to the word they. So they love that question. So be careful of he or she and just simply circle it when you see it. That is the right answer. It's the gospel truth. So let's beware though. Sometimes when we actually attempt to be more politically correct in our writings, we can end up annoying those who we're trying not to offend. It's kind of the opposite of what we intend to do. So you're thinking like, well, how does that happen? Well, here's how it works. Sometimes when you repeat phrases like he or she, or repeat phrases like his or her too many times, or if you start using a lot of clunky phrases like actor or actress, or if you say male person as opposed to a mailman, or if you say waiter or waitress or watron, which is a real word. If you don't want to talk about a waiter, which is masculine, or a waitress, which is feminine, you can use a watron. They're also trying to get rid of words like actor and actress and turn them into actron. Well, sometimes when you use those kind of phrases too many times, the sentence screams politically correct as opposed to being subtly respectful, which was really what your intention was. You didn't mean to offend anyone. You actually tried to not offend anyone. But sometimes when you're trying to be so kind and jump around a little bit of dance around the politically correct words, sometimes it actually just self in destructs rather and turns into just a hot mess of an essay. So until the grammar gods tell us that they is now singular, and right now it's not. So don't fall for that trap on the SAT. They is not singular. It's still plural according to the grammar gods. Well, until then, we can maybe try to avoid offending the 21st century readers with a couple tricks. So here's a couple tricks for us. First, use plural. Plurals are nice because you can use the word they, which is plural. So instead of saying every writer, just simply say writers. Writers should be aware of the power of language when they choose their pronouns. It's a safe choice to use something plural. Secondly, if you're going to use he or she, use it only once in a sentence. Don't use it more than once, and don't use it too many times within a paragraph. So every writer should be aware of the power of language when he or she chooses pronouns. So use it sparingly, not too frequently. Third, try to avoid his as a determiner. So maybe substitute a different determiner in or just getting rid of the determiner. So if I said the writer of the news story should have kept his opinion out of it, just say the writer of the news story should have kept opinion out of it or all opinion out of it. Fourth one, we can always turn something into what we call an elliptical clause. An elliptical clause is where we actually eliminate the subject and maybe have some understood words. I could say every writer should be aware of the power of language when choosing pronouns. So instead of coming out and saying when he is choosing pronouns or when she is choosing pronouns, if I make it elliptical and just kind of cut out that subject, I can avoid actually directly stating which pronoun I want to use. That's kind of sophisticated. You can also rewrite it into an adverb clause or maybe even a who clause. Who clauses are great because whos don't have genders. So I could say when a person buys a house, he should shop carefully for the lowest interest rate. Well, I don't know if I want to use the word he. So if I said a person who buys a house should shop carefully for the lowest interest rate. Love the word who because who has no gender. And lastly, if you can't get around that at all, just change the person. So instead of writing in maybe third person, is it possible to write in second person you or first person we, which have no gender either? And those are always ways we can safely get around using a very specific gender pronoun. So why not make up your own pronouns? Well, okay, that's actually a possibility. Yeah, Harvard, Yale, Stanford is actually where it started, and then it has ballooned into other universities. A lot of colleges are allowing you to apply using your own pronoun and to still use your own pronoun. There's a whole language out there. Let me show you what I mean. So many universities have begun allowing and encouraging you to actually invent your own pronouns that will not reveal your identity or your gender rather, or force you to specify what gender you are. So I have linked here an article if you ever want to check it out. It's called Z or They, um, a guide to using gender neutral pronouns. But here's the gist of it. These are the gender pronouns and the languages that actually exist out there. So these pronouns over here, let's see if I can bring up my little cursor, my little highlighter. They are. These pronouns sitting right here, this is actually called the language. So in the language of ni, these are the pronouns. Ni laughed. I called Nem. Ner eyes gleam. That is ners. Ni likes himself. And you'll notice there's a language called V or Spivak or Z. And Z has two different languages. There's Z, and then I called Zerb. There's also Z laughed. I called Zer, Zer eyes gleam. And there's also another one called Z, but it's spelled with an X. These are all pronouns that have been invented in a whole language that you're allowed to use if you'd like to. And for a long time, I thought, well, this is just out there, maybe really big universities. But it's not. It's everywhere. When Millersville University came over and visited our school one time and spoke to our GSA club a number of years ago, they brought buttons with them and shared them with the students. And they had basically these buttons that said, her on there, HIR, and then hers, HIRS. And therefore, it allowed people to realize, hey, you can use a different pronoun if you wanted to. So it's in small universities, it's in big universities, it's all over the place. We have to be careful of what pronouns we use because we might actually insult someone by using certain pronouns. That's what's happening with language, and we have to be okay with the fact that our language is changing. So these are all the invented pronouns. All right. So, regardless of how you personally may feel, maybe you are supportive of the new pronouns, maybe you're completely outraged that there are new pronouns. We can all agree that we have an ethical responsibility to be at least aware of how some of our words may be archaic and offensive to others. I think it's a really important point, so I'll state it again. I know that some of you might be supportive of new pronouns, and I know a lot of you might be outraged by having new pronouns. But I think we all can agree that it's ethical, that there are some words in the English language that we should get rid of. We shouldn't have had them in the first place, and we should get rid of them now. We should stop using them. And we have the power to do that by just simply choosing to use a different word. And so maybe, as much as it might bother some people, maybe gender pronouns are one of those where we should reconsider why we're still holding on to a pronoun which is just so binary if our language and our world is changing a little bit. So just consider that. What I want to do next is I want to take a look at some of the archaic and sexist language that still exists. And I'm going to use some examples from the theater, which still holds on to some really gender-specific, almost sexist language, and talk about how we actually can avoid that as writers.